Okay, so today's daf very straightforward, and it's not a long daf. And today's daf is Memches. One second. Masechta Kesubos Daf Memches, and we're going to begin from 7 lines from the top. Tana Rav Yosef. So we're discussing the pasuk of Sheira Ksusa V'Inasa. The Gemara uses that according to some Tanoim, that there's a chiyuv da'oraisa for a husband to provide for his wife food. That's what the Gemara used in the previous daf of, according to a couple of Tanoim, what the word she'era means. But Tana Rav Yosef taught that she'era refers to how to do tashmish, how to cohabitate with your wife. And she'era means zu kerev basar. You must have your body touch her body. That means that when you have tashmish, there's a chiyuv shelo yineg ba minik parsiim. You shouldn't be like the Persians. Shemishamshem mitoseim bulvusheim. That they cohabitate with their wife really wearing clothing. We just began in Sheldon, and we're on the Daf Memches. We just started from Tana Rav Yosef. So we just learned that Rav Yosef taught that the word she'era teaches you that the obligation of the husband is that when he is mishamish mita with his wife, when he cohabitates with his wife, he has to be without clothing. He cannot be like the Persians that are cohabitating with their wives, but both of them are wearing clothing. The reason why he's probably doing that is because he thinks it's tznius not to go naked, so he's wearing his clothing. And that's Asr. Messiah le Rav Huna. This is a proof to where Rav Huna taught. The Amr Rav Huna taught. If a man says, I can't do tashmish, I can't be with my wife, Ela ani bebigdi, or I'm wearing my own clothing, he bebigda, and she should wear her clothing. We should cohabitate, and we both have to wear clothing. And he's, again, doing this with tznius, so maybe he's this v'kak the chumrah. So the Gemara says, Yoitzi, he has to divorce, if his wife wants, she could demand the divorce, v'noising ksuba, and he has to give a ksuba, because that's not derech chiba. In other words, that's not called true love unless they're not without clothing. So the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah. Let's go back to the Mishnah for a second. That one of the obligations of the husband to the wife, here we are, ukvurasa. Okay, he has to bury his wife. He has to pay for the burial, the funeral costs. So Rabbi Yehuda says, "Afila ani should be Yisrael, even if you're a poor Jew, la yifchos mishnei chalilin u'makaynenes. You have to make sure that there's at least 2 flute players by the funeral, u'makaynenes, and a hired speaker to get people to cry." So it seems that the Tanakama disagreed with that. Now, what's the machlekes all about? Michlal, let's see the Gemara. Michlal, the Tanakama Savar, our Tanakama, our Mishnah holds, Hani loy. You don't have to get a flute player and Mekainenes, somebody, a eulogizer, somebody who causes other people to cry. So why shouldn't the Tanakama hold that way? Hey Chedami, Id Orcha, if in her family, when they bury people, where she comes from, the tradition is that they hire flute players. They have musicians by their funeral. So my Tanakama Damaloi. Why should the Tanakama disagree with that? If she comes from that, if she comes from that kind of a family, he has to provide that for her. Be the lav urcha, but if it's not her family's tradition to do that, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda, why should Rabbi Yehuda require him to pay for a flute player by her funeral? Answers the Gemara, like Tzricha, our Mishnah is talking like this. Ka'oin, for example, the urcha didei v'lav urcha dida, which means that in his family, the tradition is to have a flute player, but for where she comes, there is no tradition. In fact, they have funerals without any fanfare. They don't hire any outside people. So it's in his family, but not her family. So Tanakama has an opinion. When we have a rule, that means that a woman's standard of living goes up when she marries. Not only that, but even, let's say a guy gets married to a girl and his wife, and they're poor, and then he hits it big. He can't say to his wife, okay, I hit it big, but we're going to pretend that we're poor. because once he goes up in financial status, she has to go up with him, and she can demand that she wants to live better. And if he loses the money, she has to be maintained on that high standard. So that's what it means. She goes up with him financially. Her status goes up when he goes up, and she doesn't go down when he goes down. So that's interesting. And it's learned from a Ba'ulas Ba. So it's learned from a Pasuk that way. So if her standard has to go up, and so therefore, if his standard of living in his family, he comes from like a princely family, and they used to hire flute players by funerals, so then he would be required technically to pay for her flute players. So the Tanakama holds not so. Because Hani Mili, when do you say that her standard of living goes up? When she's alive. Avala achamisa, but after she passes on, Loi, we don't say that. And therefore she reverts back to the custom of her family, which is not to have flute players. That's why Tanakama says you don't have to pay for that. Rabbi Yehuda says, Afila achamisa, even after she passes on, the requirement is to that she goes up in standard, and if it's his custom family to pay for a fancy funeral, he has to pay for it on behalf of his wife. Amar Rav Chizda Amar Rav Ukva, that Rav Ukva said, Allah Rav Yehuda, the Allah is like Rav Yehuda. New Gemara. V'Amar Rav Chizda Amar Mar Ukva. Mar Ukva said another statement, another not relevant to what we said before, but let's see what he's saying over here. Mi shenashtata lo yaleinu, somebody lost his mind. Okay, he went nuts, and he has assets. So the Mishnah says, Bezdin Yordin l'nechasav. Bezdin, the court, will go and take possession of his assets, vizonin, and they'll pay for the assets, start selling assets to pay for food, umafarnasin, and for clothing, asishtay, for his wife, ubanav ubanoisav, and for his sons and daughters, the davar acher, and they're required to pay for other things. So they start selling his assets in order to provide for his family and for something else. The Gemara is going to explain what that something else is. Amalei Ravina le Rav Ashi. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, "My shana, why is that case different? Mahad, the time that we learned in a brisa. We just learned, by the way, that if someone goes nuts and he can't, he's meshiga, so then Loyalenu, then Bezdin takes over and starts selling off his assets to provide for his family. But here is another scenario. Misha halach l'medina siyam. The Brisa says if someone went on a faraway trip, the ishtoi tevas mizonis, and his wife is demanding she needs somewhere to eat, she needs food. Bezdin yardin l'nechasa. Bezdin will go to his assets. Vizonin umafarsin. They would sell and provide food and clothing for only as ishtoi, for his wife. Avaloi banav u'benoisav, they don't give for his sons and daughters. V'loi davar achan, they don't provide for anything else. They don't sell his asset to pay for something else. So why is it when he went insane, Bezdin will sell to provide food and everything for the family, and when he goes away on a trip and we don't know where he is, Bezdin will only sell the items, the assets, only to pay for food for his wife, not for his children. That was the question. Amalei. So Rav Ashi answered Ravina, it's very simple. The guy that left on a business trip, he knew what he was doing. And the fact that he didn't give instruction to provide for his family is an indication that he doesn't want his assets to be provided for his family. Because really, a person, as we learned, and we're going to learn, he doesn't have to provide for his sons and daughters. So therefore, if he didn't provide instructions that he wants his family to be supported, you could only sell his assets to support his wife, because that's an obligation in the ksuba, but not for his children and daughters. But if somebody suddenly goes insane, so he didn't prepare for such an event in his life. Therefore, Bezdin assumes, since he probably always was giving food for his family, so we can assume that if he would be sane, he would want us to go into his property and sell it to support his family. So that's the difference between somebody who going insane and somebody just goes leaving on a business trip. My davar acha, we just learned that if he went to another country, and so we sell his assets to support his wife, but we don't pay for that other thing. What is that other thing? Rav Chizda says that tachshit. We don't buy his wife perfume. Rav Yosef says we don't give tzedakah. We don't give tzedakah from his assets because presumably maybe he's giving tzedakah maybe overseas where he is. So he doesn't want you to sell his assets at home to give tzedakah. Man biyama tachshid, the one that says tachshid, that you can sell his assets to provide, you can't sell his assets to provide perfume for his wife. Koshkein tzedakah. Certainly you can't sell his assets to give tzedakah. But man de amat tzedakah, but according to the opinion that says we don't sell his assets to give tzedakah, yes, that we don't sell his assets to. Aval tachshid, but to sell his assets to provide perfume for his wife, Yavin Allah, we do give it to her. And we sell his assets to buy this special perfume. Why? Because then we can assume he didn't want his wife to become repulsive. He would want his wife to smell good. And probably didn't think of it. So therefore, he didn't instruct to sell my assets to provide perfume for his wife. But we assume that that's what he intended and would want. And therefore, we would sell his assets to provide perfume for his wife. Amar Rav Chia bar Oven, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Chia said in the name of Rav Huna, Mi shahalach limdinas hayam. A new thing. A person went to another country, umeisa ishted, his wife died. Okay, so he's not around to pay for the funeral. So Bezdin Yardin Lenechasa, Bezdin takes over his assets, his property, and they pay for the funeral costs. They bury her according to his standard. So maybe if he comes from a poor family, they'll bury his wife according to his standard. So the Gemara asks the question, only on his standard, not according to her standard. Let's say she comes from a very illustrious family where they make a whole big shebang for a funeral. They hire flute players. Would you not require him to pay from his assets for such a funeral if it was the custom in her family? Amos, so the Gemara says, yes, you're right. Certainly, whatever her custom was, we always do. But let's say in her family, they had very low-key weddings. And his family, they would have high-key weddings. That's what he meant to say, that you would require him to pay for a funeral according to his standards, because we would say, Oili Imai, she goes up in standard based on his financial status, even after death. And that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda said. Al Kamash Malan, that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Early Imai, you go up in standard. A wife goes up in standard according to his husband. The Eino Yeredis Imai, she does not go down when he goes down. Even after she passed on, you have to pay for the more expensive funeral costs if that's what his standard is. Amar Ramatana said, if a man said, okay, let's say a man has a wife. Let's say she has sons from previous marriage, okay? Now, and he has sons from another marriage. So he has a stepson. Now, when she would die, so her kesuba is inherited by her children, not by his children. So what happens like this? Ramatana said, im mesa. A man said before he dies that I'm going to die, and then let's say my wife dies. So my wife's ksuba, the ksuba is going to be inherited by who? By her children from a previous marriage. And my assets are going to be inherited by my kids. So he says, if my wife dies, don't bury her according to my assets. Let my kids, the man says, let my kids keep my assets. And the one that inherits her ksuba, her children should pay for the funeral. Shaiman Lai, we would listen to him. If those were his instructions, we would listen to him. So the Gemara says, of course, that we don't need him to instruct that, to tell us that that her family has to pay for the funeral. What's the difference if he said the nafli nichse kami asked me because his assets are falling to his orphans, to his family. Even if he doesn't say nichse kami yasmi remi, his assets are falling to his children, and her ksuba is falling to her children. So certainly it's under her, since they're getting the ksuba, her children, they should pay for the funeral costs. So we don't need him to instruct us which one of his stepsons or his children should pay for the funeral costs. Certainly, without his instructions, her children, his stepsons, will pay for the funeral costs because they're inheriting the ksuba. So what is Ramatana teaching you? Ella, the opposite. He's saying, you medayik fakert. Only if he says, if my wife dies, don't pay for the funeral costs from my assets, then we listen to him. But if someone would say, if I die, he's saying about himself, if I die, I don't want my assets to pay for my funeral costs. So who's going to pay for your funeral costs? He wants that the tzibur to pay. He wants tzedakah to pay. He's so cheap that he wants the shul to pay for his funeral costs. Ain't shayma like that. We don't listen to him. Lav kol kemini. Nobody has the right to cause his children to become rich. And put himself on the community that they should pay for things that he could potentially pay for. This is the story of the welfare state that we developed here. That you get privately rich and the community pays for some of basic necessities that you can really afford. So a person can't do that. New Mishnah. Mishnah discusses like this. We're talking about a man, in the way it was done, they first made Kedushin, they gave betrothal, and then months later, you went to the chuppah. Now, technically, midaraisa, a woman who got engaged to a man, he just had kedusha, she should be allowed to eat truma because she's his wife. But midrabanan, they said for two reasons why a girl who's just engaged to a man, she cannot eat truma if he's a kohen. Why? Because the reason why is because since she's still living in her father's house, we're afraid that if her new husband, the kohen, is going to just ship some truma food to her, she's going to give some of the truma food to her brothers who are Yisraelim, and that they're going to eat truma when they're not kohanim. And the other reason is that perhaps the marriage is going to break off. Maybe he's going to discover, through the kedushin period that she's a handicap. She has a blemish that he didn't notice before, and it'll turn out that he made kedushin by accident. There really wasn't a kedushin there because the whole thing was a mistake, and she was all this time eating truma. So for these two reasons, Chazal said we don't go what the Torah says that she could eat truma, but we have to wait till she actually got married and went under the chuppah with this guy. So that's what the Mishnah says. La'olam, all forever and ever, he b'rshus av, she's in the jurisdiction of her father. Ad shitikanes, we go to Amud Beis, l'rshus baal l'nisuin, until she went for the chuppah for marriage, then she could start eating truma. She becomes under the jurisdiction of her husband. What exactly is chuppah? Chuppah is a machlekes rishonim, but basically the way we do it is that chuppah, for the most part, is that you make a little place, like a place that we say belongs to the groom, and the kala comes into that room, and that's the chuppah. So that's why we make the 4 poles with the thing on with the surrounding on it to make it like it's a room, and everybody can see. They even can see that she went into a special room with her new husband. But it doesn't mean that he has to be alone with her. But others hold that chuppah is actually the yichud, when actually the husband and wife go alone into one room. Either way, after that, when she does that, that's chuppah, and she's like his wife, and she can eat truma if she's a kohen, if he's a kohen. Now the Mishnah says, Mosar av l'shluchei abal, harei hi b'rshus abal. If the father gave her over to messengers of the husband sent messengers to bring her to his city where they're going to have a wedding. So the father said, I can't attend the wedding, but I'm going to give you over to the messengers of the husband. It's almost as if she now belongs under the jurisdiction of the husband. The Mishnah doesn't say in what way. What way is they're not really married because she didn't do chuppah. She's now traveling to the husband's town. All that just happened was the father waved goodbye to her and said, you could leave my house. So we have to see what that means in the Gemara. But let's say the father went together with the messengers of the husband, and so he's holding on to her hand as they're going to the husband's place. Of the messengers of the father went together with the messengers of the husband. She remains in the jurisdiction of the father because he didn't let go of her yet. But once the messengers of the father gave her over to the jurisdiction of the messengers of the husband, so basically it's like the father giving her over to the messengers of the husband. She's now considered under the domain of the husband. For what halachas, we'll see, because she actually didn't do chuppah. So the Gemara is going to discuss that right now. First, the Gemara discusses, what does it mean that forever a woman cannot eat, is not considered married to married until she actually has chuppah? What halacha do we learn from that? There was an opinion called the Mishnah Rishona. The time we learned in the Mishnah that a girl that got engaged to a Kohen, right? And they went 12 months, and for some reason, he didn't arrange a chuppah. So the Mishnah says, if the time elapsed and he did not come arrange a chuppah so he can marry her, so she's like in limbo. She has kedushin, but they didn't have the chuppah. He has to give her food, and she can even eat truma, because then the Isser D'Rabbanan goes away. That's what the Mishnah Rishona holds. Kamash Malam, we don't hold like the Mishnah Rishona. We hold like the opinion, the La'olam, that it's forever. A woman is not allowed to eat truma no matter what until she goes under the chuppah. Because truma, we're very, very strict on that. She has to actually go under the chuppah until be called husband and wife, and then she could start enjoying truma. Now the Mishnah we discussed in the Gemara, she's now under the domain of the husband. Now the Gemara understands that there must be something. She didn't have chuppah here. So in what way is she under the jurisdiction of the husband? So Amar Rav said, Misirase lakoil. That means that every halacha that a husband, that a wife has a response, the husband owns the wife, so to speak. Whatever her mitzvah, if she finds something, it belongs to the husband. Her salary belongs to the husband. It seems that he could be made for nullify her nadarim, that the husband has the right. So if the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband, and then he waved goodbye to her, that implies every din every din that a husband has to a wife that owns the wife, that is what's given over here. Chutz mitruma, except truma. She still can't eat truma until they actually have a wedding. Rav Asi says, truma. She can even eat truma. She's not living in her house. So you can think about why Rav Asi would say that. Because since she left her father's house, she's not going to give any truma to her brothers. She's not living there anymore. So even truma, she's considered married to him, and that's it. He owns her. So the Gemara asked a question. According to Rav Asi, everything, when the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband, it's everything. So the Gemara asks, according to Rav Asi, Ravuna asked Rav Asi, he asked this question. The beginning of the Mishnah says that she's always considered in the domain of the father until she actually went to the chuppah, which implies that she can't eat truma until she actually had a chuppah. So how could you say that if it was just masru a'av l'shluchei habal, that's enough for her to eat truma? The Mishnah says no. For truma, it seems to imply that you have to have an actual chuppah. And for the Gemara, so that was Rav Huna asking against Rav Asi. So Rav, who argued against Rav Asi, he said, you're right, for Truma, we don't consider she can eat Truma. He defended Rav Asi. He said to his son, that's not even a good question. Amalu Rav said, Lav aminu lecha, didn't I tell you? Like tezel basa ibcha, don't go after a Mishnah which you could learn in either direction. I could answer you that misirasa zuhi knasasa l'chuppah. The fact that he gave her over to the messengers of the husband, that's equivalent of going to chuppah. That's what the Mishnah says. It doesn't mean to exclude one or the other. You could, a woman becomes totally her husband's when she goes to chuppah, and totally her husband, even if the father would give her over to the shluchei habal. Now, Shmuel says li rushasa. Shmuel says that the only thing that the husband has rights as long as they didn't go chuppah, if masru av l'shluchei habal, is only to inherit her. What that means is that, let's say she brought in some material possessions. Let's say she brought in a car to the marriage or some clothing, and she dies. So even though they didn't have chuppah yet, but the fact there was masru av l'shluchei habal, so it's almost like the father said, I gave her possessions to take into this marriage. I fully gave it over as a kinyan, even if she didn't go to the chuppah, a meichel if the husband keeps it. But other than that, the husband doesn't really own her. He cannot, unless he goes to chuppah. So her salary belongs to basically still her father or herself. And if she finds some, yes.
Excuse me to interrupt, but it's different from, let's say, they get divorced. There was something we learned about Son Barzel. Where does that come into play here? That I understand all the salaries obviously belongs to him. I'm trying to compare it to like almost like like when the marriage ends, the things that she brought into the marriage, not her salary, but her own possessions. Isn't that belong to her and would probably belong to the father as well?
So the what we discussed, but the material possessions, let's say, what we're discussing over here is what I think we're discussing is clothing, jewelry, things that she brought along from her father's house.
Right. So the things that she brought for the marriage what is Son Barzel? What does that mean that
Soin Barzel, let's look at a piece of real estate as Soin Barzel. Not as Soin Barzel would be a type of real estate that he guarantees that if there's a fluctuation in price, he will make her even. In other words, if it goes down in value, then he will make sure that remains the same. She didn't lose any money. But at the same time, he can benefit from it.
Understood.
Means he doesn't guarantee the price, but he can eat the real estate. He can enjoy the rental income from it, but he doesn't guarantee the fluctuations of price. So now, but either way, those assets belong to her. What we're talking about here, the Yerushasa, is movable assets. Like that's why I keep saying. So
clothing and other things like that are movable. I see. Okay.
He died, so he gets to inherit it because why did the father give it over? Technically, you could ask, but the father had only wanted to give over the car if she is going to actually go through with the marriage. He didn't expect that his daughter is going to die before the marriage. But the answer is that since he was so excited about his daughter getting engaged, going to the chuppah, on her way to the chuppah, he was meichel the whole thing. That's what we're learning.
Okay.
And Resh Lakish says, liksubasa. If they didn't go through the chuppah, again, we're talking about where the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband to bring her back to his town for the wedding. That means he could inherit. He takes control of her ksuba. What does that mean? Ksuba samahi. What are we talking about over here? That means the imesa yarisla, that if she dies, yarisla, that he inherits all those movable objects that Hainu de Shmuel. Then Rish Lakish is saying the same thing as Shmuel. That means that if she dies, he gets to keep the car and all the movable assets. So what's the point? They seem to argue. Rav Huna says, no, Rish Lakish is saying one more thing. Loimer subasa ma'achar ma'ona. That if she somehow he dies or divorces her, even though she never went to chuppah yet, we consider her as a bu'ula. And if she goes to marry somebody else, she only gets a mona. The fact is that if she never left her father's house, she just got engaged and somehow the marriage absolved, she's still a basula. If she marries somebody else, she should get 200 as her ksuba. But here is a little bit different because after the kedushin, months later, the father gave her over to the shluchei habal. So therefore, it's almost like she went to the chuppah, and therefore, if Resh Lakish says that if she married somebody else, she would get a mana. That means that everything. That when he gave her over, she's like his wife for everything, and she can even eat truma. Like Rav Asi said. So the Gemara says, so it's Rav Asi, Rav, and Shmuel have an argument. So the Gemara is going to say that Shmuel is the only one that's correct. Meisave. We learned in a brisa. Baal, let's say the father accompanied the messengers of the husband back to the husband's city, or the messengers of the father went to not the father herself, but the messengers of the father accompanied the girl together with the shluchei, the messenger of the husband. Now, this is important. They came across that she owned a piece of like a courtyard that belonged to her. on the road. The Nichnasa Imay Lolan. They went and they said, "We're not going. This is not our chuppah, but we're going to sleep in the courtyard together, in the open courtyard." Even though she sent over, her father sent over the car, all the items for the wedding. He sent it already to the father's town, to the father's city, but they still didn't go to chuppah. They're on the road from the father's house to the husband's city. So Mesa, if she dies, Obia Yarsha, then the father still inherits her. He gets back all the items that he committed for this wedding because they're not going through the wedding because she died. But if the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband, he's waved goodbye to her, or the messengers of the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband, or they're on the road and they have a courtyard. They're on the road to the husband's place, and they passed the courtyard. They belong to him. And they go into that courtyard, and he says, "Okay, let's get married here. It's my courtyard. It's my place. Let's get married here." Even though the ksuba is in her father's house, he didn't send over the items for the wedding yet, right? The car and the jewelry and everything. He didn't send over the father. If she dies, Bala Yarsha, the husband can inherit it, because that's almost like he waved goodbye to her, and now he took over possessions of those items that were committed for this wedding. When was he saying Yushasa until to inherit her? Aval truma, for her to eat truma. A woman cannot eat truma until she actually had a kosher chuppah, not just a makeshift, temporary sleep in the chutzner, we'll call that. No, she has to have a normal chuppah. So therefore, that's exactly what Rav Shmuel said. Shmuel said, Liyurushasa, but not for truma, and only for Yerushasa. So tiyufta the kuli, this is it's a refutation on every other opinion. Tiyufta, that is a refutation. So bottom line is that when she was given over by the father to the messengers of the husband, the only thing he has rights to now is that for the items that were committed for this marriage, if she would die, he would inherit it. But for her to eat truma, she can't eat truma. For her salary, if she would work, it would still belong to her because she didn't go to chuppah. If she would find the mitzvah, it would still belong to her. Basically, you need the chuppah to consummate a full ownership of this girl. Now, one last point, and that's it. Hagufa kasha. The Bryce itself has a contradiction. Amrit, you said in the Brysa that if they're on the road together and suddenly they veer off the road, Nichnasa imay lolan. She went in with him to sleep over in an outdoor courtyard. So they committed themselves that they're going to sleep there, but nothing more than that. To take a rest there. Tama dololin, because they said they're going to sleep there. Hostama, but if they didn't say why they're going into this courtyard, l'shem nisuim, then we can assume that they meant to go into this courtyard to get married, to start the marriage. So that's stama. If they don't say anything, we assume that they're going into a courtyard for the sake of marriage. Ema sefer. Let's look at the end of the brisa. If he went into the courtyard for the sake of marriage, that's when we assume that he can inherit her, because they're saying that, let's go into the courtyard and pretend we're married. Hastama, but if they don't say anything, Lulin, then we assume that it's to take a rest, but not for the sake of marriage. So the question is, what does stama mean? What is stama? If you don't say anything and they just go into a courtyard, what is it? One part of the brisa says it seems to imply that they're married. Another part of the brisa says that they're not married. So how do you learn the brisa? So here's where we're going to end. Amar Rav Ashi said, stomach turner. The brisa is not talking about that they went into a courtyard stating their intention. They went into a courtyard without stating intention. But who owned the courtyard? Stam chatzadida, if she owns the courtyard, so if they didn't expressly say their intention, it's lalin, it's to sleep. It's not l'shem nisuim. So it's not for sake of marriage. They need a place to rest. She said, I own this courtyard. So they took a break there. Therefore, she's not considered to be, the first phase of the marriage, and therefore he doesn't take ownership of her possessions that were committed for the marriage because they're not considered married. But stam chotzer didei linisuin. But another chotzer, the stam chotzer didei is linisuin. That means that if it's his ownership, if he owns the property, then if they go in without stating what their intention is, it's for nisuin, that they want to start phase one of their wedding. And therefore, if they're starting already phase one of their wedding, then the only thing that's relevant lahalacha is that those things that the father committed for the wedding, if she would die, he takes ownership of that. Other than that, she's not really his wife because it's not really a wedding. It's just the ownership of certain possessions that she brought to the wedding that the father said, oh, I'm so happy she's going to wedding. No matter what happens, I give it to my potential son-in-law. So that's why he get to keep it. Okay.